All right, class. First off, as always, good day. I'm glad you're here. So, this lesson is going to be about some uprising from gladiators. Uh, we're going to be talking about some architectural buildings that Rome built that were good and bad. And then we're going to talk about, um, because again, I told you about the thing on TikTok about like why people obsess about Rome. And one of the things is that people are obsessed with the collapse of Rome. How did Rome, this mighty empire, collapse? And we're going to actually talk about how religion played a factor in its fall. Okay. So, the objective today, we're going to analyze the Spartacus revolt. We're going to critique the rise and treatment of Christian followers. And then we're going to create an argument on why people still believe Nero played a fiddle. So when we get to that part of the lesson, I'll be explaining that. So we'll just keep that in your mind, okay? All right. So here is your warm up picture. All right. So your question is to explain what is happening here. Okay. Now, excuse me, I'm not gonna itch on my leg. Um, Earlier today in class, somebody said, "Oh, it looks like they're chasing this white horse." No, those four horses, um, the two brown ones, the kind of reddish looking one, and the white one, they're all together. Okay, they're not running wild. If you look, the guy has the reins on them. So he's controlling them. Uh, so this is actually a sport. Okay, so tell me if you've ever heard of this sport. It starts with the C. You know, if you watched movies like uh, you know, Ben Hur, I believe even Spartacus, they mentioned this. Uh, the movie Gladiator, I think, even referenced this as well. So try to think back on some movies you may have seen about the Roman Empire. Okay, so pause the video, write your response because we're moving on in three, two, one. Now, Rome had some social programs and large construction programs going on during its Pax Romana. So again, when they're going through peacetime and they're really expanding and doing well for themselves, they have a lot of things going on. Now, Trajan, the Emperor Trajan, had a lot of social programs going on that really focused on poor families in like raising kids, educating them, because to him it was like if the kids were not well fed and um, not given a good education, that they're going to grow up to be malnourished, not developed right, um, and I hate to use the word, but dumb. And what's that going to do to the Roman Empire if they have a whole country just full of people who can't do basic math, can't do, basic things? What's going to happen to the empire? It's going to crumble. So he really focused on that. Like, let's pay attention to this. Let's put a lot of emphasis on uh, helping the children. Okay. Now, their architecture was magnificent. They have some roads that are still being used today. Okay. So it's pretty impressive stuff. That warm up picture, if you look right there where it says circus, um, it looks like a little track field. That's what it was. Okay. And that's where they would have the horses running in circles and things like that. Uh, a student said some years ago, that kind of looks like the NASCAR, when they drive in circles. Yeah, except this is with horses. So basically, it kind of was like NASCAR. Um, the aqueducts, the one to the side of the versus circus, that was very interesting. Is that they can try get water to travel from one part of the country to the other. You know, and it was pretty impressive. People got access to fresh water. and that water traveled miles and miles and miles. Now, I had a student in class tell me, "Oh, well, what about the where the gladiators fought? That is at the bottom. You see the amphitheater. That's where the gladiators fought." Okay, so yes, impressive buildings, and on top of that, by 200 AD, Rome had grown to its like basically its climax to the top it'll ever grow, and that was 3.5 million square miles, which is pretty darn big. You have to remember, Rome started off as a little village, and now here they are, 500 years later, just one of the biggest empires there is. And they even traded with China. Alexander the Great didn't even trade with China. So that just showed how big and powerful they were. Now, here's the thing though, slavery was huge during the Roman era. Okay. Um, just like other ancient civilizations, when they fought another group, they would, yeah, they would fight and kill them, but they really didn't want to kill them. They would try to capture them as much as possible because once they captured the people, they would return them to Rome in Italy and other places around and make them slaves. Now, there were some slaves that were more desired than others. The Greeks were some of those slaves, um, because the Greeks were known for being intelligent and skilled. So they wanted those slaves, those Greek slaves, to be tutors, musicians, doctors, artists, craft people, people who made things out of stone and stuff like that, because they had the skill, they had the knowledge. Okay, because the Greeks were not idiots; they were pretty smart. However, other people like the German barbarians and some of that, they made them cooks, waiters, cleaners, gardeners. What I mean by cleaners, they would have them like picking up like the horse poop and things like that, you know. So wasn't pretty jobs. Now, I had some student ask me some years ago, you know, did they treat their slaves worse than the like Americans treated their slaves, back in the 1800s and stuff. Um, I found this interesting little tidbit. It said that a Roman writer said it was actually cheaper to basically treat your slave like crap and work them to death and then replace them instead of treating them well, make sure they had plenty of food, that their health was good, and things like that. He was like, no, that's going to cost you too much money. You might as well work them to death, and when they died, get rid of them and get a new one. So that's kind of bad. Okay. Now that guy you see in the statue right there, that is a gladiator named Spartacus. Okay. If you saw the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe and you saw those how he got the gladiators to fight back and stuff, that was kind of what happened. Basically, he got these gladiators to fight back against the Roman army, and they won. The Roman army basically was like taking them lightly, like, oh, these guys are just gladiators, and but these gladiators, they fought for their freedom. Now, Spartacus was seen as a hero to those gladiators and the underdog people, you know, but eventually he did get captured and he was killed. And 6,000 of his followers were crucified. Okay. Now, if you don't know what crucified means, we'll be getting to that later on. Okay. So at the end of the Pax Romana, that 200 years of peace, the separation between the classes was pretty big. The rich people lived in nice homes, villas, things like that, whereas the poor lived in, pretty rundown apartments called insulae. Now, these insulae would collapse often because they were made cheaply. They weren't made with the idea of like, oh, let's make sure this is nice, good building. It was like, let's hurry up and just put this together, you know. And on top of that, the floor was made of wood, and sometimes it caught fire because people had stoves, candles, lamps, and sometimes those, lamps and candles would fall. And if you've ever seen, dry wood next to a flame, you know that thing catches fire like that. And that's exactly what happened. So imagine an apartment that's, let's say, 5 stories. Okay, just hypothetically, 5 stories. Let's say at the third floor, it catches on fire. Now, when that wood catches on fire, the floor, where's it going to go? It's going to go down, right? Everything's going to go down. And then that second floor was made of wood. What do you think is going to happen to it when the fire hits it? It's going to catch on fire, right? And then same thing when it hits the ground floor. Now that building, it's lost 3 floors, and they're not made to last. They're not made to be extremely sturdy. So if the bottom 3 floors are gone, chances are the rest of the building is going to fall, collapse. And so once the fire started, it was hard to put out. Now, one of the most famous fires happened was like basically the poor section caught on fire, and it was a raging fire. And this was the time of Nero. And supposedly, the legend is while Rome burned, like you see in that picture, he played the fiddle. We know now that he didn't do that. How do we know that? Because the fiddle, the instrument that they said he played, wasn't invented yet. So, how could a guy play an instrument that wasn't invented yet? Okay. So, that's how we know the story is a lie. But again, people still believe it, even though they know it's a lie. So, here's the thing: in Rome, Christianity began as a religious movement within Judaism, and it soon started gaining some followers in Jerusalem, Judea, Galilee. Okay, now one of the main apostles to spread the word of Christianity was Simon. Okay, and he was a fisherman. But there was another guy, another apostle named Paul, and Paul was able to spread the word more, mainly because of two things at that time. One, he was highly educated, and two, he was actually a Roman citizen. And when you were a Roman citizen, you had more access to things and you were more believed, especially if you were educated. So when he went around talking to Gentile people, people basically who weren't Jewish, um, people listened. And so he went to different communities all around Asia, and stuff like that, in the Middle East, and started preaching. Okay. And this started to gain momentum in the Christianity movement. So, why is this being talked about? Well, because the thing is, you have to remember the collapse of Rome. The thing is, in Christianity, you're basically told, hey, if you believe in uh, this one God, you believe him, you do what they say to do, your soul will enjoy paradise. Thing is, the Romans had like 50, 70 some gods, and you had to please like all of them, and there was no guarantee that you would enjoy paradise. So some poor people were looking like, well, you know what? Maybe it's probably better just to worship one God instead of a bunch of them. Whereas this group is saying you will go to heaven, you will have paradise when you die. Whereas this one says you may or may not. Now, to some Romans, well, actually a lot of them, at this time, the very beginning, they didn't like the Christians. because they said, who are you not to worship the gods, that everyone knows about, Zeus, Athena, and all them. And on top of that, you don't worship the emperor. What's wrong with you? So they saw this as an act of treason. And like I asked in class, what's the punishment for treason, for going against your country? And I had a couple students go like, isn't that death? It's like, yeah, even to this day, even our country, if you go against our country, the punishment is death. Okay. So during this time when the Christianity movement started to really kind of grow, um, Nero persecuted a lot of these guys. Um, and he even blamed them for that fire, that big fire that happened. He blamed them, saying, "Oh, they started it. Yeah, these guys are the ones that started it." Excuse me. And when in reality, chances are he may have started it. We know he didn't play the fiddle, but some historians believe he may have had a hand in the burnings. Now, some of the things that happened to early Christians, um, when they would be put into a gladiator pit area, and they would release lions and tigers and so animals like that. So they were fed to them. And I had a student say in class, "Well, I would have climbed the wall." Yeah, you could have tried, but people would push them down if they tried. On top of that, too, lions can jump pretty well, especially with their big paws. They hit you, they're gonna knock you down. You know, um, that picture you see on the bottom, that's the crucifixion. Okay, the nails used to go in the wrist, right here, right, and as you can see in the picture, they would go in the foot. Now, I had a student in class ask me, "Well, in there, why are they upside down?" Because not every crucifixion was upside, right side up. Sometimes they crucified them upside down. Okay, and you have to remember, then birds, insects, they'd be coming at picking at them and eating them, biting them, stuff like that. Um, and they would leave them out there for days on end. So it was not a pretty way to die. Now, by 200 AD, the persecution of Christians started to go down just a bit. Okay, not absolute, but just tiny bit. Now, you have to remember at this time too, not everyone could completely read and write. So how did the religion spread? Well, a lot of it was done orally through teachings, conversations, campfires, some of that. And eventually, the apostles who wrote down what they saw, what they heard, things like that, they wrote it down. And then those papers were collected, you know, and made into the New Testament. Okay. Now, again, why is this hurting going to hurt Rome? Because you have to remember, Christianity is about, peace and things like that. And they're supposed to say, you're not supposed to go and kill people, you know. Um, Whereas the Roman gods are like, no, you're supposed to, there's a god of war and you're supposed to fight gloriously in battle. And then when you do that, your soul will be going to paradise because you fought, things like that. Now, here's a religion saying, no, you shouldn't fight. So now there's a contradiction. Now there's not many soldiers joining the Roman legion now because of this religion. Okay. And then their teaching spread. It went from the western major cities to the east, and little churches are popping up. And again, like I said, they were started off orally, through talking and telling the stories. And so they started off in the language of the Jewish, and then they went into Greek, and then later on they would be Latin. So it changed as time went on. Okay. Now, here is your Final question. Now, we know Nero did not play the fiddle while Rome burned. But why do you think the average person still believes in that story? Even though we know he didn't do that. Why do you think people hold on to those stories even though they know it's false? So take it into modern day context as well. Why do people believe in something that is false? They know it's false, but they still hold on to that idea and believe it to be true, even though it's false. You know, things like think of things like the flat Earth. People, oh no, the Earth is flat. Well, we've proved it time and time again that the Earth is round. You know, oh, we never landed on the moon. No, we've proven that we've landed on the moon, but people still believe in that. Why? So same thing with this. They know it's not true, so why do they still believe in it? Why do you think people hold on to those stories? Okay. So once you finish this question, you're done with this lesson. So hopefully you learned something new. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Okay. Um, with that being said, guys, you take care, you be safe, and I'll see you guys later. Okay.